It was mentioned earlier that the so-called military activities of the terrorist movement constitute only 20% of the greater onslaught on South Africa. This is only part of the truth, as the 2080 division may convey the false impression that the South African Defence Force and the police are completely divorced from the 80% psychological war, and as such are free to execute their tasks in respect of national security without any non-military interference. This, of course, is not the case. Our enemies have no illusions about the fact that the South African security forces will always be our last bastion of resistance. They also know that the ultimate defeat and destruction of this bastion is a prerequisite for a communist takeover in South Africa. But as they are not capable of winning a military war to achieve their goal, they must resort to other methods to undermine and break down South Africa's military resistance. It is not surprising, therefore, that our defence force, as in the case of the civilian population, is sought out as a prime target by enemy propaganda. In this propaganda campaign against the South African Defence Force, the communist once again relies on proven camouflage tactics. In this way, the insurgent journalist and radio broadcaster will file and broadcast lies and half-truths about the South African Defence Force. Their aim is clear. The military forces of South Africa must be discredited and made suspect in the eyes of the South African community and the international fraternity. For example, preemptive strikes by the South African security forces against terrorist bases in the operational area are seized upon and presented as killer raids on innocent people. The actions of the South African police during demonstrations and unrest are treated in similar fashion. When the police have no other option left but to intervene, their behaviour is classified as the use of brutal violence.
Dit is natuurlijk nie net in die openbare media wat die propagandaveldtog teen die Suid-Afrikaanse veiligheidsmagte gevoer word nie. Daar bestaan reeds frontorganisasies van die ANC wat slegs een doel voor oë het, naamlik die aftakeling van Suid-Afrika se militêre weerbaarheid. Organisasies soos Omkeer en Salskom, wat nou bekend staan as COSAWAR, probeer om jong skoolverlaters te beïnvloed om hulle militêre verpligtinge te ontduik. Maar hierin was hulle nog nie juist suksesvol nie.
We left South Africa because we didn't agree with the politics of the country and the government presently in power. We met at university and formed a band, and we all knew that once we'd finished our university education, we'd have to go into the army and fight for the South African Defence Force, which is actually just supporting the apartheid regime.
This is dedicated to our soldiers, our brave young men in uniform. We salute you. We thank you for your courage, for giving up the comforts and safety of your homes, for leaving behind the ones you love for our sake, to protect and guard people like myself you don't even know. We also remember our young men who have fallen while serving our country, and we weep with those who loved them, young heroes who swore an oath when they said, "We shall rise, we shall fall, at your command, this for you, South Africa."
Despite all these attempts to undermine and discredit the South African Defence Force, South Africa's military strength has not been affected. In reality, our military capability has increased in the past 5 years, despite a strict arms boycott. This boycott, in fact, made a major contribution to South Africa's flourishing arms industry. As a spin-off from this development, the South African Defence Force could add new sophisticated weapon systems, such as the G5 and G6 artillery systems, to its arsenal. The South African Defence Force also benefited from new developments in the field of small arms. The R4 semi-automatic rifle is a case in point. New and improved standard equipment were likewise developed and put into service.
Verskeie operasies wat deur die Suid-Afrikaanse veiligheidsmagte in samewerking met die plaaslike gebiedsmag in Suidwes-Afrika van stapel gestuur is, het genoegdoende bewys gelewer van die Republiek se vermoë om die vyandelike bedreiging die hoof te bied.
Operation Protea, launched in September 1981 against SWAPO bases in southern Angola, was the largest military operation undertaken by the South African Defence Force since World War II. Large quantities of weaponry and armaments of communist origin were captured by the South African security forces during the operation. It was subsequently discovered that weapon systems developed and manufactured in South Africa compare very favourably with, and in some cases are even superior to, the weapons captured during Operation Protea.
Die onwrikbaarheid van die Suid-Afrikaanse regering ten opsigte van terroristebedrywighede en die welslae wat die Suid-Afrikaanse veiligheidsmagte in die verband behaal het dan ook die grondslag gelê vir 'n nuwe politieke klimaat wat vroeg in 1984 in Suider-Afrika posgevat het. Onderhandelinge en samesprekings tussen Suid-Afrika en twee van sy buurstate, Angola en Mosambiek, het uitgeloop op die Lusaka-ooreenkoms en die verdrag van Komati. Dit was die begin van wat allerweer as 'n nuwe vredesinisiatief verwelkom is. Hierdie vredesinisiatief het nie net tot die sluit van verdere verdrae gelei nie. Interstaatlike betrekkinge is genormaliseer aan die hand van nugtere realiteite. Dit het onder meer gelei tot die uitsetting van die ANC uit Mosambiek, sover dit terroristebedrywighede betref, terwyl SWAPO in Suid-Angola aan bande gelê is.
The signing of the Nkomati Accord was a severe blow to the African National Congress, as it had to relinquish its terrorist bases in Mozambique. The Kremlin exploded in a spate of venomous propaganda. The general theme of communist propaganda was that South Africa used its military power in a brutal manner to force Angola and Mozambique to the conference table, and that these countries had no other option but to sue for peace. In spite of the expectation of better interstate relations in southern Africa, the danger of communist expansion must not be ignored. The communist long-term strategy for southern Africa is not in the least affected by the new détente initiatives in this part of the subcontinent. It can be expected that the Kremlin will do everything in its power to turn this situation to their own advantage. The military presence of the Soviet Union and its surrogates in southern Africa is still a reality, and as a consequence, South Africa cannot decrease its military preparedness.
Ondanks waarskuwings deur die minister van verdediging en die hoof van die Suid-Afrikaanse weermag, is daar mense en instansies wat meen dat Suid-Afrika nou sy militêre paraatheid kan afskaal. Hierdeur kan 'n gees van valse gerusheid by die inwoners van Suid-Afrika geskep word. En dit kan op sy beurt lei tot openbare kritiek op aspekte soos die nasionale dienspligstelsel en die verdedigingsbegroting. Soos die geskiedenis van konflik meer as eenmaal bewys het, is die soeke na vrede 'n ewigdurende proses. Hierdie soeke vorm dan ook deel van die aanhef tot die nuwe grondwet van die Republiek van Suid-Afrika en kom duidelik in die volgende woorde tot uiting. Verklaar ons dat ons bereid is om ons plig te aanvaar om gesamentlik met alle vredelievende volkere en nasies wêreldvrede te soek.